I'm following a dude that got spit on and put to death, going through his process of serving the people that he was here to serve, which obviously was ultimately all of us. But even at the time, um, and he was extremely consistent with it. He was consistent with his message. He was consistent with how he interacted, and he was consistent in his service.
Welcome to the Built to Last podcast, a community for coaches founded on the principles encourage, equip, and empower. We are performance coaches working for eternal purpose. Now, here are your co-hosts, Charlie Ray and Justin Bentavania.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Built to Last podcast. Here we are all about performance coaching with eternal purpose. And we are so blessed today to have JD Mehlhorn with us. He is the head strength and conditioning coach for Olympic sports at Georgia State. And coach, this is something I've been wanting to do for a while. And so I'm glad we can get you on here.
Yeah, coach, I'm excited to be a part of it. I like what you got going. It's a good thing. And, it's a fun field to be a part of. And, it's great when you can find other good people to network with and have the opportunity to have a good conversation with.
Amen, brother. Well, just to get the listeners a little more familiar with your background and kind of what drives you and why you got into the field, I'm just curious to hear a little bit of your story and why you wanted to be a strength coach.
Yeah, man, I think it's funny when I tell my story, I feel like it's similar to a lot of other stories. Coming up, I was an athlete, and I had a lot of coaches that invested in me. And, they invested in me as an athlete, but they also invested in me as a young man. It's kind of starting in high school and then definitely in college. And they had a big impact on me and kind of my growth and development. And so as I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do, I was a math guy and a numbers guy, honestly. I went to college as a physics major, and was planning on going to do an engineering graduate school. I was a math minor as well. About halfway through school, though, I was kind of, I don't know. I came to that point that everyone in college does, like, what do I really want to do?
Yeah.
And man, I realized how much I actually enjoyed as an athlete training myself, and really learning about training. And I feel like I was kind of getting an education in it without necessarily doing the formal education part of it, because I was someone that was really curious. So I was always asking questions and wanting to know why we were doing what we were doing. Well, at the same time, my collegiate strength coach, and I can talk about him in a minute, was also one of our football coaches. I played Division III football at Bethel University, small Christian school just outside of Minneapolis. Outstanding experience, outstanding football staff. But Coach Rick Meyer was our strength coach and also a coach in the defensive side of the football. And so he was kind of a mentor to me before I even decided I wanted to get into strength and conditioning. And so when I was making that decision, thinking about what I want to do, I'm like, man, I really like this training thing. I enjoy my time in the weight room. I've had a lot of coaches that have really impacted me. Like if I look at my life and like how I feel like, how I was built to make an impact, that's where I feel like I need to be going. And, fortunately I was close enough with the physics and math stuff that I finished that stuff anyways and kind of went ahead and added an exercise science major to it. And so that gave me some different perspective on things, but really it came down to, man, I had a lot of awesome coaches invest in me. And so when I sat back and said, like, what do I want to do with my life? I made the decision to go that route.
That's awesome. And so, yeah, I know you mentioned that there were certain individuals that guided you on that path. So, yeah, I would love to hear more about them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there are too many people probably to count now that I would call mentors.
Yeah.
And so it's hard because you feel like you could always leave someone out. And now I even have people that I work with that, while they may not be in a specific mentorship role, I feel like I learned so much from them. But Coach Rick Meyer at Bethel University, like, man, that dude, he did a lot for me. And coming in, there was Coach Meyer was our, he 6'4", 250, everything you kind of think about when you think about like what is a strength coach like. Everything was about toughness, and rightfully so. It wasn't fake toughness. It was, and that was kind of a part of our culture. It wasn't stick your chest out, be big and tough. It was, decide who you want to be, write it on a rock and do it every day, be about it every day. And, Coach Meyer, well being about those things, was also, very invested in our growth and development physically and as football players. And we were with him year round. Um, Coach Meyer was with us on the football field, but then he was also with us in the weight room. And, when I started working with Coach Meyer, I had known a few things about training. I was fortunate enough to have some awesome coaches in high school as well, that taught me about things as we were doing it, and I got exposed to some things. So that kind of greased the wheels for a relationship with Coach Meyer, where I could kind of talk to him about training. I thought at the time probably somewhat intelligently, but I was such a novice. You don't know any better. But I mean, the man kind of took me from where I was starting and not knowing anything, talking to me about what we were doing in training. And then later on during my college career, we're Division III. He was one strength coach for freaking 25 teams. I mean, just a ridiculous volume of student athletes that he's having to deal with. And so he allowed me and a few others of us to be a part of the strength and conditioning program as undergrads. So like my college campus job for about a year was weight room supervisor, because our weight room was athletics and Gen Pop.
Gotcha. Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
but at the time, I got to start programming for volleyball under his tutelage,
Nice.
and start working with some of our other teams on campus, under his tutelage. And he spent a lot of time investing in my growth and my knowledge, but then again, even more so my growth as a young man, to the point where 2 weeks ago, maybe three now, Coach Meyer spoke at one of my best friend's weddings.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, and he was, it's obviously now what, 10 years past, give or take. And a story that he told was about me and this best friend of mine at the
Oh,
wedding.
that's phenomenal.
And it was a cool thing, because it was, I don't know, it was a story of growth, and something about a story about humility. And but he doesn't necessarily always know is like how big of an impact that he had on that for all of us.
That's really cool. And honestly, it reminds me a lot of my biggest mentor, Jimmy Prendergast. And, he taught me a lot about being a man and just more than the X's and O's. And he was head strength coach at Hofstra for a long time, and he just got into the tactical setting. And I think about when I asked him too, like, how do you define success? Like what for you tells you that you're doing a good job, or how do you gauge progress? Because in strength and conditioning, it's hard sometimes because you
Right.
can't gauge it off wins. Like you can't really gauge it off injuries. There's so many other things that go into that. And
Right.
he said, if my athletes are inviting me to their weddings, you know what I mean? Things like
Yeah.
that is how he would gauge success. And so it's just cool to see these trends amongst these guys and ladies in the field.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I love to hear that. And that is, I mean, it's funny because it feels like, when I had that experience, like that was the norm, right? That was kind of, for me, that's what I got to experience. And so like I just kind of thought that's how it was in a lot of places. And I knew I was at a special place at Bethel, and we had a really good coaching staff. But, obviously you go on to other places and you move and you see a lot of things, and you just kind of realize how fortunate you were in some
Yeah.
things.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The people make it, man. The people are huge.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. So talking about, right, being the right person and your character and just these things that are going to rub off on your athletes. I think our spiritual life makes a huge impact on our athletes as well. And even if we're not in a Christian school, and I know we have a ton of listeners who are in that setting where they are in a Christian university or high school, and then listeners that are not, how would you describe, like, what does it mean to you to be a man of God in this field, and how do you use that platform with your athletes?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I was thinking about it a little bit as you kind of prep me for things like, honestly, I believe my faith, like I'm called to follow Jesus and the example he sets. And Jesus was the ultimate example of a servant leader.
Yes.
And I think that, in our positions, we are in an outstanding position to be servant leaders for our student athletes, for our staffs, for our coaching staffs, for the university, and for the department. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be everybody's doormat. But I think being intentional about serving our student athletes on a daily basis. And to be honest, I think one thing that the coaches that I've seen do it best are um, extremely consistent figures. Like they're consistent in their integrity, they're consistent in the way that they speak to the athletes, they're consistent in their daily habits and actions, they're consistent in their service, and not to say that they're not affected by things, not to say that I'm not affected by things on a daily basis that are very real and bring out very real emotions and real feelings and maybe make me feel like I don't want to do certain things on certain days or make me want to
Hmm.
speak to people in different ways or not exactly be the person that I want to be all the time. But I think uh, being able to be grounded, having that foundation and faith and understanding, this is what I was called to do, and I'm following a dude that got spit on and put to death, going through his process of serving the people that he was here to serve, which obviously was ultimately all of us, but even at the time, um, and he was extremely consistent with it. He was consistent with his message. He was consistent with how he interacted, and he was consistent in his service.
Yeah, that's good, man. And it's like, yeah, that ability to separate your feelings, like how you feel on a certain day, from your calling and your responsibilities. And I just think that's huge. And we're all working on that, and myself
Right.
included. I guess if we can go a little deeper on that for a second, I mean, what would you say to coaches, like practical tips of, like, you come in the morning and you just had, a little disagreement with your wife, or you just, your kids are acting up at home. Like, how do you leave that in the office and then go out on the floor and be Coach JD like you always are?
Yeah, I think a couple of different things, and I guess a couple of different perspectives on it. One thing that I started doing, and it's funny, is it was a New Year's resolution. I don't know, like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe. Um, but I basically, and this is going to sound small and stupid, but five minimum of 5 minutes on my way to work, I try and spend in prayer, like just regardless of when I'm going, where I'm coming from, that sort of thing. Like on the way to work, my goal is to spend a minimum of 5 minutes in prayer. And sometimes it turns into longer than that. And sometimes it's 5 minutes. And I'm human. So there are times where the 5 minutes turns into 3 minutes of prayer. And then I start thinking about, well, I kind of got this to do and that to do, and then you kind
I
of work
struggle with
back.
that, man. Oh,
Oh
I
man,
struggle
you,
with that.
you kind of work back into it and or you get the issue with doing it on the way in is you get cut off and then you get up, whatever. Right. Like I said, I'm very human, but I do think that consistent habit is something that helps get me in a little bit of a mindset. As far as for whatever reason, whether I'm actually praying about work or not, I do try and make a point to pray about my student athletes and staff in that time. I think that helps get me in the mindset. My wife, on the other hand, she is a worship music on the way to work every morning. And for her, that puts her in a position where she's ready to handle a lot of the challenges of the day. And I think, even something small like that can be grounding. It can kind of put you back in the mindset of, here's what I'm here to do. The other thing I think is knowing your why. And I've been good at this sometimes, and I've been bad at this sometimes, as far as really coming back to my why. Why am I doing this? Because I think sometimes when you lose sight of the fact that I'm put on this earth. To be honest, this podcast has helped me kind of even think, kind of get back to what is my why. Like my impact here is eternal. It's a lot more than it's a lot more than collecting a paycheck and seeing back squat numbers go up and dealing with wins and losses and seeing all those sorts of things. Our impact really is an eternal impact, and I think when you view it from that perspective, it's um I don't know, sometimes it's hard to not be consistent. I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
there's obviously lots of easy things that can kind of throw you off, and everybody has different emotional temperaments. That's I'm not saying never get excited or never get mad or
Hmm.
never, that's ridiculous. But I do think, having some things that kind of ground you and give you a little bit of perspective. Um, man, not only do I think it is really the right way to interact, I also think that you gain credit and respect with your athletes, with your staff, when you are kind of that person that is, um, that consistent figure of integrity, a consistent figure that is, working to follow Jesus' example. And to be honest, I think when you are grounded in that, it allows you to be a lot more comfortable being vulnerable about some of those other things.
Mm-hmm.
I've had sessions where I've told my athletes, hey y'all, like, to be honest, I'm dealing with some things right now, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't feel that great for whatever reason, but like I'm gonna give you my best today, but I want to be vulnerable with you and know, like, I'm human. Like, I am not having my best day for whatever reason, or I'm feeling this type of way, but I want you to know that I'm still gonna give you my best.
Yeah, and that's huge. And I think that's what leadership is, right? It's balancing, and balancing can be a lot of different things. And part of it is, yeah, being real with somebody and showing them that you're a human being and you're not
All right.
just a brick wall and you're not just stoic. But then at the same time, right, like you said, being consistent and having that strong presence. And so that's just really encouraging to hear you say that. And that's awesome. I think our listeners are going to take a lot from it. So, one thing that's always helped me too with my consistency thing is the word of God. It never changes. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. This book's been around for a long time now, and it's just a rock for me. And I know it's the same for you. And so, just curious, like what are you studying right now? What are you reading, and kind of what's God teaching you right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny we talk about leadership a little bit, in our small group, and God being consistent.
Yep. Yep.
In a small group, we have so I'll go a couple different ways with this, but we just worked through the book of Joshua, and so obviously, during the book of Joshua, right, the Israelites that's the conquest of, the land of Canaan. And we see a lot of awesome leadership qualities out of Joshua, but we also see, the people make mistakes, right? And have to turn back towards God as they make mistakes and turn back. And I think there's a lot of good leadership things that we see out of Joshua, but we also see the very real relationship that the people have with God, right? They're consistently falling short, and God is consistently coming back to them, and um, you know reaffirming the covenant, right? And fulfilling his promises. Um, but in our small group, and which is a really good thing for me, we have a very much a varying level of background knowledge of the Bible, and even time spent in our faith. And I think that's been really positive. I think it provides a lot of really good perspectives. And so what I'm actually working on now uh, is a study looking at God in the Old Testament and God in the New Testament, right? Because that's obviously, there are some areas where you could say, well, how does, God interact like this here and like this here? And is it the same God? What are the things that are consistent, or how do we kind of reconcile that? So I'm in the process right now. I don't have the whole thing put together, but I'm in the process of trying to put together a little study for our group about, looking at, these consistent qualities of God, and why they kind of manifest themselves one way in the Old Testament and one way in the New Testament, which I think is really good for me as well. I mean, it's sometimes, you get into these theological debates, and sometimes the cart gets put before the horse, where it's about being right about, how God is, rather than viewing theology as a form of worship. Like, in this theology, like, I'm worshiping God because I'm pursuing him. I'm trying to know him more. And so that's been kind of a fun thing for me personally, because, like a lot of strength coaches, I'm kind of an analytical type
Yep.
person,
Yep. Me
right?
too. I'm the
Like,
same way.
logical, like, want to know, what's the right and wrong, and, how does this kind of equal out, how does this plus this equal this? And so it's been kind of fun working through that, and looking through some of those nuances.
That's cool, man. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, it's cool to see, God in the 10 Commandments, right? Just there's a certain side of him that, he has, things that, even though we're in the new covenant now, it doesn't mean that that's not still a part of who God is and what he desires. And so,
Right.
it's just super interesting just to see the parallels there. And so, that's awesome, man. Well, hey, I remember, I remember one time way back when I first got into the field, it was back in 2014 at the NSCA Coaches Conference. A guy named Adam Fight. I know a lot of our listeners might have heard of him, and it seems like
Yeah.
you have as well, Coach. Met him. We started talking a little bit, and then after the conference, I just shot him a thank you just for taking the time to speak with me. And then he sent me a handwritten letter back in return,
Oh,
and
wow.
he signed it. Keep changing lives, not just numbers.
Mm.
Adam Fight. And that always stuck with me. And I know we were talking about it a little earlier, and just hearing about who you are as a man of God. I know that's something that's important to you too, making an impact on people's lives. And so for our listeners, people who are interested in this podcast, I know that's something that the way that they feel as well. So
Yeah.
do you have any advice for them on, how do you go deeper than just the X's and O's? Like, how do you get past just programming and talking to your athletes about the training session, and then going deeper into like helping them for life?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I mean, I think honestly, it's, you know, it kind of depends on, I think, the venue that you're in, right? What are your opportunities even outside of the training session? Because the training session is the training session, right? There has to be a certain amount of focus and intent throughout the training session to make sure that the athletes are getting what they're supposed to be getting, and it's safe and it's effective. I think it's those times outside the training session, around the training session, before, after the training session, where you get an opportunity to kind of take a deeper dive, or, to be honest, sometimes when you have those makeup lifts, right? I've got one or two athletes that are coming in, because they had class during a time. Okay, well, obviously we need focus and intent when we're under the bar, but maybe there's also something to be said for having a little bit of a conversation, in those in between times, and those rest periods, and that sort of thing. And I think, for me, what's been, I guess, what's allowed me to develop the best connections with my student athletes, and then from those connections being able to take deeper dives, is working on getting to know the athletes for more than just what they do here as athletes. And I know that sounds like a really obvious answer, but when you start to learn about your athletes' backgrounds, where they're from, a little bit about their family, things that they like outside of athletics, I think it gives you so many different opportunities then to have little conversations that build trust, right? And then leave room for opportunities when they ask things back, right? Like, now they're in our level, at the collegiate level, we're all adults, right? Now our athletes, maybe haven't experienced life as much as we have, right? Which is part of why we're in mentorship and coaching roles. But when they ask questions back, now there's inroads, and there's opportunities, and there's genuine interest from those athletes about, what makes me tick, or what are some of the things that I enjoy doing outside of here, or why do I do what I do in some cases, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think that provides, then again, opportunities that are organic and authentic, to kind of share things and get deeper with athletes. And that doesn't happen obviously with every athlete, right? That's not something that's always the norm, but I think there's a meaningful aspect to it when it's um, not just coach giving me a sermon on the front end of a lift, or
Mm-hmm.
talking at me about something. It's a more of a, I don't know. You can almost say, like, it's a relationship amongst equals almost at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're still in a position of power as coaches, obviously, but when you are getting to that human aspect of things, like,
Right.
you know, everybody likes something, right? And everybody has different things, that different ways that they grew up in, different areas that they grew up in, and different experiences. And I think when you can kind of get to that and have some of those organic, authentic conversations, that's when a lot of the really good stuff comes, and that's when, you develop really good relationships that I think then have the opportunity to go farther, and years past, just the few hours that, you see them on a given week.
Well, coach, it seems like to me you're saying that you really have to earn the right to speak into somebody's life like that. It's hard to just preach at people all the time and just tell your athletes you need to fix your hip shift. You need to show up on time. You need to X, Y, and Z, fill in the blank. It's like we're always coaching at them, but it's
Right.
like, do we earn the right to speak into their lives? And I thought that was
100%.
awesome that we explained that.
No, 100%. And to be honest, I mean, I think it helps when you're coaching as well, right? Like, when you have trust built up with someone and you got somebody that they know cares about them as more than an athlete.
Right.
I think there's just a lot more trust, with everything, which I think makes everything better, everything easier, everything more effective, and to be honest, things more fun.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, for both sides. Yeah, that's
Right,
awesome.
for sure.
What about the staff, right? I know you're pouring into your athletes, and I know you mentioned earlier praying for your staff on the way in. How
Yeah.
are you intentional about leading them?
Yeah. So, honestly, we operate here in a way, multiple weight rooms. It's really challenging sometimes to get us all together, as far as being able to have consistent staff meetings. I mean, um, I think that would be great if we could do it, but I value my staff's time and I value their lives outside of work here. Um, too much to want to have a staff meeting at 5 in the morning or, 8 p.m. If we don't have to. So, honestly, though, with my staff, my goal all the time is to support, encourage, and create a positive environment for them to grow. And so, honestly, but when I hire a staff, like I'm trying to hire really good people. And I do think, if there's one thing from a strength and conditioning standpoint that I think is super important when you get to be a head strength coach or director, like spend time like getting the right people on the bus. Like honestly, like if you have an opportunity to make a hire, whatever that process is that you have, like trust it and don't sacrifice, a few weeks here or there for the long term, like getting the right person in. Because I think that's super important. I've been super fortunate with the people that I've been able to hire that honestly, like there are times that they're telling me what to do. I'm like, hey, y'all are smart. Like, and I know you've got some great experiences. Like, you can tell me what we need to do, but my goal as a director and what I try and be intentional about is supporting them with everything, making their job easier. I'm going to support them in any way, shape, or form that I can. I'm going to encourage them when they're exploring things, when they're learning things, when they're trying things. And then I'm really going to I'm going to try and show as much as I can that I value them as individuals and that I value them as people more than just as strength coaches. And that's what I mean about being really intentional about their time outside of here. I'm very much don't want our staff to be a bunch of desk guarders. I want them to be able to take care of their relationships outside of here. I want them to understand that I care about them, but I also care about their significant other and I care about their family. And if there are opportunities, and this is already, this has happened in some cases, if there are opportunities that would potentially take my staff away from here, but it would be great for them or their family or their whatever. Like I'm your number one supporter in trying to help you get that opportunity. Because again, my goal is to show them um, a little bit of Jesus' example through servant leadership. And so I guess I don't view it as this is my staff trying to help me accomplish my goals. I view it as um, I want to bring in a staff that brings in some of their own goals and their own things that they want to do. And now I may have some things that I think would be cool here for the department, but my primary goal is to help serve the staff, uplift the staff, and let them do some really cool things, like see where they can take us. Maybe I have some ideas every once in a while, but how do I kind of support some of the awesome things that you want to do and help you grow as a coach? And be able to have again, authentic, genuine relationships that aren't so much, boss and staff type thing. And obviously that's the nature of how we're set up, right? There has to be someone in the supervisory role that's doing the evaluations and that sort of thing. But I I don't really like it to operate like that or feel really like that. I think it's so much more effective when it's like, man, we're in this thing together, right? And like when I get a call from my director or a text from my director, it's not, oh crap, like what is he asking me to do or what I do wrong? It's, hey, this might be something cool that we got going on, or like, he's supporting me in some way or that sort of thing. And so I try and really be intentional about that with my staff. And I think even something as simple as valuing their time, and valuing them outside of here as strength and conditioning, because we're going to spend time. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. There's going to be time that we're going to spend, and it's a tough industry in that way sometimes, but really showing that I value them and their time outside of here, and even their significant others and their families. I think that that's something that goes a long way.
100%. Yeah. That's huge. I mean, I know that you spoke earlier on the impact that your bosses had on you and coaches had on you. And it's just cool to hear how you're now applying that with your staff when you're in that role. And so,
And I hope so. I mean, you have to talk to them, right?
yeah,
To see,
yeah.
like, am I successful, right? Like, and for the listeners out there, like, man, you are hearing like the best and even sometimes like theoretical things that like I can give you, right? Like in practicality, like I'm not always great at all these things that I'm talking about, right? And we see this in strength and conditioning all the time, right? Somebody they're on the podcast and man, that must be the perfect
Well,
program.
yeah, he's
Like
polished, man.
they
Yeah.
got that thing set up, man. It's all good to
Yeah.
go. And then you get there and you realize like it's not like it's bad, but it's real, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There are things where it's flawed and it's not perfect and it maybe doesn't look as good as it sounds.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, like even with the things that I'm talking about, like there are things that I'm talking about that I'm striving for, but I am falling short in some cases. And obviously that's a picture of our faith as well, right? Like we're
Yep.
striving for things, we're falling short. Thank God and thank Jesus for grace. Because we know I know I need it,
Yeah.
but it's the same, same thing at work as well.
Yep. That's awesome. No, it's a great perspective, man. It's so true. Well, hey, again, sticking with leaders, and we've been talking about it a lot today. What would you say is one of like the better leadership lessons that you've learned?
I guess the biggest thing, I hate to come back to it again because I know we've talked about it, but the biggest thing is like, in my opinion, like servant leadership is the way to lead. Like, I think that's the most effective way to lead. I think that's the way that we're called to lead from Jesus. And I think that's the thing that the coaches that I've had that have had the biggest impact on me have been servant leaders. And they've been leaders that are trying to figure out ways to get up underneath me and lift me up consistently, even at their own inconvenience. And a lot of times, things that may, doing things for me that may not be convenient for them, or may not help meet their specific goals or needs, but they are intentional about picking me up. And that's one thing, Bethel University, like that's the one big thing that Coach Johnson, so Steve Johnson's the head football coach there, and Coach Jimmy Miller, who was there when I was there, and Coach Mike Frazier. I mean, there's a bunch of coaches there, like they embodied that. They embodied those things. And like as a young man and a student athlete, like I wanted to run through a wall for them. And it wasn't because they yelled at me and if I did it wrong, I was going to get in trouble. It was because like, man, I got all these dudes that are in my corner, like supporting me, like giving me everything. Like I want to be good for them. Like I want to do my best for these dudes because of how much like they've given me. And I think, when I think about my leadership style, like even when I lead teams, like, my goal is to show that I'm invested in their success and I'm invested in them and their growth and their development to the point where like they want to do better, like, and they want to do better for themselves because I've hopefully helped them see their value, or helped encourage them to value themselves. But then also, they hopefully in turn are saying like, man, here's a coach that really is invested in me. Like, man, I want to make that guy proud. Like I want to make that, I want to make that coach feel like, man, they're getting, they did a good thing by investing in me, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
They did something right. And that's how I felt with my coaches. Like, man, I want to prove that coach right. Like, man, he was breathing encouragement into
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Like he was giving me all this good juice all the time, even when I didn't deserve it, or when I didn't, feel like I deserved it. And man, I want to like prove that guy right. And I want to, he's breathing into me, and like I want to do something that's going to like make him feel proud, kind of thing. And that's kind of one thing. I know not all athletes operate that way, but man, it was powerful for us.
That's cool. You always hear, about people getting motivated to prove somebody wrong, but to prove somebody right. That's a whole new level of motivation. I think that goes
Like
further than proving somebody wrong. So
100%, 100%, 100%.
that's good, man. Well, hey, what other lessons have you learned in your career? I mean, I love this portion of the podcast. I mean, even just like a greatest lesson you've learned, a story from a place you've been. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, so this profession can be tough sometimes. And I think, when you're in it long enough, you realize that from a lot of different aspects. But I'll tell a little story. So when I was working at the University of Connecticut, so I moved from Minnesota out to Connecticut. Minnesota was home, but I had an opportunity to get to football at the University of Connecticut. I was engaged to my now wife at the time, and I remember calling her, and she was finishing graduate school. So we were doing a distance thing, engagement from 1,000 miles away. Said, like, hey, baby, like, are you okay to move to Connecticut? Like, when we get married, like, I've got this awesome opportunity. I really think I want to do it. Like, it's an opportunity to get into football. Coach Klein's an awesome dude. I feel like I could learn from him, who was the head strength coach was going to the University of Connecticut. And so we took that leap of faith to move out, move away from home, move into something that was a little bit unknown. And we were in Connecticut I think I was there for almost 2 years. My wife was there for about a year, maybe a year and a half. We got married after I've been there for a little while. And as quick as it was there, it was gone. We were in a football program that was struggling. Our head football coach and the head strength coach I worked for didn't really see eye to eye on some things. And, as an assistant on the staff, you're trying to figure out what is my role? Like, where do I kind of fit in? I'm supporting my head strength coach, but I can see where, like, the football coach and our head strength coach don't really see eye to eye. Like, what am I really supposed to do about it? I don't really know. So I just, I continue to do my job and support our strength staff because they're awesome dudes, and do everything I could. Well, you stink long enough in football, you're not going to have a job for very long. It is wins and losses, right? Like, that is the thing that everybody is judged by. And so, after a couple of bad seasons, really, I hadn't even been there 2 years. There were staff changes made. There were multiple staff changes made on the field. There were staff changes made in the support staff. And so the head strength coach I worked for was out. I was out. Some football coaches on field were out. And now all of a sudden, my wife and I are in Connecticut, and we don't have any family up there. My wife had just finished her master's in counseling at graduate school, but moved up to Connecticut without really a network up there, at a time where it was kind of more challenging to find a school counseling job. And so she was working in a role that she was extremely overqualified for, and she was doing an outstanding job with that. But now I'm jobless. She's in a role that isn't really exactly what she went to school for, and we're in Connecticut, and it's like, man, what's next? Like, where
Wow.
are we supposed to go? And and dealing with first time I've ever been fired, right? Like, and dealing with that in and of itself was a lot, has been a lot. Looking at, okay, was my identity in some cases maybe a little bit too wrapped up in my work and in my job? And so then when that gets wiped out, like, boom, you're not this anymore. Or you're told that you're not good at it, or you feel like you're not good at it because you're whatever. Like, man, that was a wake up call in and of itself, of like, man, like, my identity is in Christ. I felt like I probably at the time was putting way too much of my self-worth in that work, right? I was getting my satisfaction from that work. I was getting my value from that work. And I think when that was gone, it was really hard for me to deal with. It was hard for me to kind of digest. And then looking at, this is not just me anymore. This is myself and my wife. And now my wife has to deal with this as well. And at that time, we had just really kind of gotten connected in Connecticut. We had an awesome small group. We had awesome, community that was building there. It was kind of, with small groups, right? Sometimes at first they're kind of your small group friends. And then as you spend more and more time, they just kind of become your friends,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
People that you do small group with still, but then you're doing all sorts of things with. And we had just kind of gotten there and felt like, okay, Connecticut's starting to feel like home. and then it was gone. And so, you know, first thing, like I said, kind of dealing with, okay, where was my identity? But then two, where do we go next? And man, it was challenging. Um, it was challenging at the time, but I remember, like, as we're looking at different opportunities or what's next, where we need to go, prayerfully considering those opportunities. And what was really hard, but I think we did a good job of, was really putting our faith in God's plan for our life. And it's hard because you feel like, wait, I'm responsible for this and that and all these other things, which is true, right? There's some personal responsibility in these things, but like, it's easy to trust God when things are going well, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when things
Mm-hmm.
are kind of cruising and rolling, I got these opportunities, I got this going on, boom, I'm moving up. Like I got these networks, connections, yada, yada, yada. Now, when you don't have that stuff, is it still easy to trust God? And it's not necessarily easy, but I think, that was a time where our faith was put to the test. And I do, like, while it wasn't easy on a day-to-day basis, I think, you know, um, it was a good exercise for us to say, like, we need to continue to trust God even in these challenging times. And as we have these opportunities, let's prayerfully consider these opportunities, each one after another, and figure out where God is calling us to be. Where do we want to be, even in this discomfort? And I know it doesn't always work out with a storybook ending, but we decided Georgia was the right place to go. My wife's family was down here. She had kind of an opportunity job wise down here. And I had to come to grips with the fact that, baby, like, we can go to Georgia and let's pursue this opportunity for you. You've been in Connecticut for me, but maybe I won't be in college athletics anymore. Like when we moved to, I saw that for the next 30 years for myself. Right. And now we're moving to a place that there's a handful in Atlanta. There's only a couple Division I universities, and there's only a few universities overall. And so I'm looking at what my odds are of, like, being able to slide in and get a job here. Is like, it's not good. It's not good. And I'm trying to come to grips with the fact that, man, maybe I'm going to be private sector or high school or something different that I didn't see for myself. But we took that step of faith out, and moving down to Atlanta, it felt, as we prayerfully considered it, like it was the right step. And my wife's job ended up being a really good thing. We had to, turn down a few things for me that I thought could have been cool. But again, we'd kind of decided that Georgia was where we needed to be, and it was a good opportunity for my wife. And we were down here for a little while. I spent some time networking, spent some time meeting with people. Boom, position open at Georgia State University, brand new head of Olympic sports. It was a newly created position. I had a few connections into the administration and some coaching staff so I was able to get an interview, get my resume in the front of the right people, get an interview. And 3.5 years later, I've been at Georgia State, and it's been awesome. And
Wow.
yeah, dude, it was wild, wild times. And I don't know, I couldn't have written it any better, to be honest.
Well, that's because God wrote it, man.
That's what I'm
You know?
saying. Like, it's 100%. It is. It's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. It's God wrote it.
Yeah. Oh, that is cool to hear, man. That's such an encouragement for people to hear. And I just think this whole episode, you've been nothing but real. And I think that's what we need. I mean, we got to hear about, the stuff that people don't see behind the camera. Like you said, you're going to hear a podcast and you're hearing a polished version of somebody, but it's like the stuff you don't see on a day to day. These things happen. And part of that is sometimes losing your job. But it's
Right.
just so cool to see, and it's an encouragement to me, to, I think, our listeners, of how God provided,
100%.
and
100%.
so, dude, that's awesome, man. Well, hey, man, I want to get your contact info out there to our listeners in case they want to reach out and go deeper on this stuff. What's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah. So my email, jmehlhorn@gsu.edu, and I'll spell it because my last name is spelled funny. That's JMehlhorn My Twitter and Instagram are JD Mehlhorn. Mehlhorn spelled the same way. And you can follow me on there, DM me, email me. Probably easier to email than to try and give you a bunch of phone numbers and stuff. And I'll try and get back to you. I usually am pretty good at getting back to people and stuff if you ever want to reach out and chat.
That's awesome, man. Perfect. And we love to close these shows out in prayer. So love to pray for you, brother. Anything specifically we can all be praying for here?
Yeah, you know what? Just my wife and I, as we go to try and start and expand our family, we're in the midst of a lot of um, a lot of life things that way, and so without getting too deep into that stuff, that's just an area that we'll be asking for consistent prayer going forward.
Well, we got to lift it up, man. Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity we've had to talk to Coach on the podcast and hear his story and what motivates him and lessons he's learned along the way. And it's just great how iron sharpens iron, Lord. Just we're all helping each other out here. And we just thank you so much for his life and his journey and the ways you've provided, God. Lord, you don't always provide exactly the way we want and when we want, Lord, but we know your plans are good. And we just ask in this season that as JD and his wife are trying to expand their family, Lord, that your good plans for them would just come to pass, Lord. As Jesus prayed, your kingdom come, your will be done. And we just ask that you bring forth your will. We know you love them. And we just ask that you'd bless them in that way, that they'd be able to expand their family, and that you would just shower on all your good gifts on them. And so we thank you for Coach. We pray that you help him to keep making an impact beyond the sets and reps and doing it for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Let's
All
go,
right, well,
man.
Thank you for listening to the Built to Last podcast, where we encourage, equip, and empower coaches to live out their core values where they live, work, and wherever they build relationships. Have a blessed day, striving to build lasting impact.